Today is Wednesday. Ice that. Today is Friday, May 13th in the year of 2022. This is M.A. Truth. And thank you for joining me on What the What, where truth speaks. There's a whole bunch of BS going on here in the States, and we all know it. However, I had to get on today because I wanted to share something with you guys. From the Atlantic, the author of The Handmaid's Tale, Margret Atwood, wrote an essay, and it's entitled, "I Invented Gilead. The Supreme Court is Making It Real." Because you know what? See, these people here in these United States have yet to get it together because they refuse to honor their own history. They refuse to, remember the shit that they've done for decades, for eons. So she's going to give us a little refresher in history. A little bit about the author. Her name is Margret Atwood. She is a Canadian poet, a short story writer, and the author of more than a dozen novels, one of which has caught many's attention, and it's called The Handmaid's Tale. Her essay reads as this. It says, "In the early years of the 1980s, I was fooling around with a novel that explored a future in which the United States had become disunited. Part of it had turned into a theocratic dictatorship based on 17th century New England Puritan religious tenets and jurisprudence." She says, "I set this novel in and around Harvard University, an institution that in the 1980s was renowned for its liberalism, but that had begun 3 centuries earlier chiefly as a training college for Puritan clergy. In the fictional theocracy of Gilead, women had very few rights, as in the 17th century New England. The Bible was cherry-picked, with the cherries being interpreted literally, based on the reproductive arrangements in Genesis, specifically those of the family of Jacob. The wives of high-ranking patriarchs could have female slaves or handmaids, and those wives could tell their husbands to have children by their handmaids and then claim the children as heirs. Although I eventually completed this novel and called it The Handmaid's Tale, I stopped writing it several times because I considered it too far-fetched. Silly me. Theocratic dictatorships do not lie only in the distant past. There are a number of them on the planet today. What is to prevent the United States from becoming one of them? For instance, it is now the middle of 2022, and we have just been shown a leaked opinion of the Supreme Court of the United States that would overthrow settled law of 50 years on the grounds that abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution and is not deeply rooted in our history and tradition. True enough. The Constitution has nothing to say about women's reproductive health, but the original document does not mention women at all. Women were deliberately excluded from the franchise. Although one of the slogans of the Revolutionary War of 1776 was "No taxation without representation," and government by consent of the governed, only by proxy through their fathers or husbands. Women could neither consent nor withhold consent because they could not vote. That remained the case until 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified. An amendment that many strongly opposed as being against the original Constitution as it was. Women were non-persons in the U.S. law for a lot longer than they have been persons. If we start overthrowing settled law using Justice Samuel Alito's justifications, why not repeal votes for women? Reproductive rights have been the focus of the recent fracas, but only one side of the coin has been visible: the right to abstain from giving birth. The other side of that coin is the power of the state to prevent you from reproducing. The Supreme Court's 1927 Buck versus Bell decision held that the estate may sterilize people without their consent. Although the decision was nullified by subsequent cases, and state laws that permitted large-scale sterilization have been repealed, Buck versus Bell is still on the books. This kind of eugenistic thinking was once regarded as progressive, and some 70,000 sterilizations of both males and females, but mostly females, took place in the United States. Thus, a deeply rooted tradition is that women's reproductive organs do not belong to the women who possess them. They belong only to the state. Wait, you say. It's not about the organs, it's about the babies, which raises some questions. Is an acorn an oak tree? Is a hen's egg a chicken? When does a fertilized human egg become a full human being or person? Our traditions, let's say those of the ancient Greeks, the Romans, the early Christians, have vacillated on this subject. At conception, at heartbeat, at quickening, the hard line of today's anti-abortion activists is at conception, which is now supposed to be the moment at which a cluster of cells becomes ensouled. But any such judgment depends on a religious belief, namely the belief in souls. Not everyone shares such a belief, but all, it appears now risk being subjugated to laws formulated by those who do. That which is a sin within a certain sect of religious beliefs is to be made a crime for all. Let's look at the First Amendment. It reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The writers of the Constitution, being well aware of the murderous religious wars that had torn Europe apart ever since the rise of Protestantism. I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied. I'm trying to read this, y'all. Wished to avoid that particular death trap. There was to be no state religion, nor was anyone to be prevented by the state from practicing his or her religion. You hear that? It ought to be simple. If you believe in ensoulment at conception, you should not get an abortion, because to do so is a sin within your religion. If you do not believe so, you should not, under the Constitution, be bound by the religious beliefs of others. But should the Alito opinion become the newly settled law, the United States looks to be well on its way to establishing a state religion. Massachusetts had an official religion in the 17th century. In adherence to it, the Puritans hanged Quakers. The Alito opinion purports to be based on America's Constitution, but it relies on English jurisprudence from the 17th century, a time when a belief in witchcraft caused the death of many innocent people. The Salem witchcraft trials were trials. They had judges and juries, but they accepted spectral evidence in the belief that a witch could send her double or scepter out into the world to do mischief. Thus, if you were sound asleep in bed with many witnesses, but someone reported you supposedly doing sinister things to a cow several miles away, you were guilty of witchcraft. You had no way of proving otherwise. Similarly, it would be very difficult to disprove a false accusation of abortion. The mere fact of a miscarriage or a claim by a disgruntled former partner will easily brand you a murderer. Revenge and spite charges will proliferate, as did arraignments for witchcraft 500 years ago. If Justice Alito wants you to be governed by the laws of the 17th century, you should take a close look at that century. And she asks at the end, is that when you want to live? Margret Atwood, again, is a Canadian poet, a short story writer, and the author of more than a dozen novels. Her book, The Handmaid's Tale, beautiful story, frightening, and should be made mandatory for every butthole that sits in the House of the Senate and Congress, not only in Washington, D.C., but in every state. How dare you, old man, force your opinion upon us? Your own constitution, you're going against it. You're trying to make the rest of us abide by your beliefs, your religious beliefs. Everybody don't believe that shit that y'all believe. And I'm just speaking for me. I don't. I was brought up in Catholicism, and I've grown out of Catholicism. I have other ways of worshiping, and they're my ways, and I don't force my ways on anyone else. And I don't think you, old man, who sits in the Senate and in Congress, in D.C. or in the states, should rule over any woman's body. You don't have that right. It is not a God-given right. Not by my God. This is M.A. True. I hope in all earnestness of heart that people would pay attention. And I say this all the time. Pay attention. Pay attention. Folks are running over you, and you don't even know it, or you refuse to see it. Buy the book. It's called The Handmaid's Tale. Read the article in The Atlantic. And the author of that I read to you was Margret Atwood. Go on, Margaret. Call it out for what it is. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.